Stand straight, Captain. Look him in the eye. Don't flinch. The words echoed through my skull like the cadence of a funeral drum. The auditorium was packed, yet suffocatingly silent. Decorated officers lined both flanks. Faces I'd studied in silence for years. Men who once laughed when my father said I'd never rise past coffee girl. But today, I was the one in command. My name is Captain Eleanor Briggs, 55 years old. And this is the story of how the man who told me I'd never make it had to salute me at his own retirement ceremony. But that isn't the real story. The real story lies beneath the ribbons, under the years of silence, buried deep in a family secret that threatened to destroy us all. You do not speak in my presence unless spoken to, my father barked when I was just 8. A general, decorated, revered, feared, but never loved. At least not by me. At his retirement ceremony, the silver-haired man stood just 5 feet from me, eyes locked on mine. His chest was stiff with decades of medals, but his lips trembled. For once, he didn't speak. He couldn't, because I outranked him now. Because the daughter he disowned, belittled, and betrayed was the one reading his farewell citation. You want to know how we got here? Let me take you back. Back to the night I found a letter in a rusted ammo box buried in the crawl space beneath our North Carolina home. A letter that shattered everything I thought I knew about who I was. If anyone finds this, you deserve to know the truth. Eleanor was never supposed to be born. My mother's handwriting. Her words. Her confession. I was the result of a mistake. Not just any mistake, but one that could destroy a military career, a marriage, even a legacy. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. I was 19, still in training at West Point, still trying to prove I wasn't a disgrace to the Briggs name. But that letter was just the beginning. You don't belong here, Briggs, the commanding officer sneered at me during drills. Not because I lacked talent, but because of my last name. Whispers followed me like shadows. Her daddy covered up a scandal during Desert Storm. Word is, she's the love child of someone her mom met in Kuwait. But I kept my mouth shut, just like I was taught, until the day I found the second letter. This one wasn't from my mother. It was from him, my real father. He was a man I had never met. A colonel, dishonorably discharged, erased from family photos, removed from every official military record my father could scrub. They told me never to reach out, the letter read. But I've watched you grow in the papers. Your eyes, they're mine. I'm sorry for the silence. It wasn't my choice. I dropped the letter and screamed into my pillow. Because for the first time, the man who had raised me wasn't just cruel. He was a liar, a thief of truth, a master manipulator who wore a uniform like a mask. Do you know what it's like to serve under the shadow of a man who didn't want you to exist? Every medal I earned, he claimed was because of his strict upbringing. Every promotion, he questioned out loud, are they trying to fill quotas again? But I rose anyway. I climbed over glass walls he built with his words. I saluted men who spit when I passed, and still held my head high. Because I was building something he could never destroy. My own damn legacy. The real turning point came the day I visited my mother's grave. I'd just made lieutenant colonel. I sat beside her stone, whispering into the wind. Why didn't you tell me? And then, I felt it, taped beneath her headstone, sealed in a waterproof pouch, was a third letter. It contained a photo, my mother, smiling beside a man in desert fatigues. Not the man I called Dad. In the photo, she wore no makeup, no fear. Just peace. I had never seen her that happy in my entire life. The back was signed. You gave me the only thing that ever mattered. I'll wait for you in the wind. E. Not my father's name. Not his handwriting. I confronted the old man 3 weeks later. He poured a bourbon, sat in his chair like a god, and waited. Who is Edward Leighton? I asked, slamming the photo on his desk. He didn't even flinch. Just sipped, exhaled, and whispered. He was a mistake. One I fixed. Like I was a broken part. That was the night I stopped calling him Dad. That was the night I vowed to never let my future be chained to his past. And that was the night I realized every war I'd ever fought started at home. Fast forward to today. The trumpet blared. The announcer said, "Commander of Ceremonies, Captain Eleanor Briggs." I stepped onto the stage, past every officer who once ignored me, past the men who tried to break me. He stood there, at the podium. For once, no rank. Just age and guilt weighing on his shoulders. I saluted. He hesitated. The audience gasped. He lifted his trembling hand and returned the salute. His fingers quivered. Not from age, but from the weight of regret. I leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. "You said I'd never make it, but I made it in spite of you." And then, I turned to the crowd and read his citation. Word for word. Without bitterness. Because I'd already won. But this isn't just a story about a salute. It's about the wars we fight when the bullets are words, and the wounds are invisible. It's about secrets that stretch generations, sins that wear uniforms, and a daughter who refused to let silence define her. And trust me, what happened after the ceremony? That's when the real truth exploded. They say the silence after a storm is the most dangerous. It fools you into thinking it's over. But storms like mine? They always leave something behind, something festering beneath the wreckage. After the retirement ceremony, the reception hall filled with polite claps, forced smiles, and military courtesy soaked in champagne. But I wasn't drinking. I was watching him. General Robert Briggs, retired. He stood near the cake table, shaking hands with junior officers he used to call soft. But every few seconds, his eyes flicked toward me, like he was waiting for a punch that hadn't landed yet. Because I wasn't done. Not even close. "Captain Briggs." A young woman in army green approached me, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Your presence is requested in the conference lounge by General Briggs." I raised an eyebrow. He still thinks he commands me. But I nodded. Not for him. Never again for him. I followed her down the polished hallway, my boots thudding against the cold tile like war drums. Every step dragged ghosts behind me, and when I opened the door, there he was, sitting in his old uniform chair, shoulders slumped beneath the weight of his own legacy. "Close the door," he said. We sat in silence. 2 soldiers. 2 bloodlines. 1 war between them. Then he spoke, quietly, as if afraid the walls would report him. "Where did you find the letters?" I didn't answer. Not yet. He leaned forward. "Do you have any idea what those words could do to this family? To the name I built? The name you built on a lie?" I snapped. His jaw clenched. I continued. "You destroyed 2 lives to protect a uniform. My mother's and mine." He didn't deny it. Instead, he reached under the table and slid a box toward me. An old lockbox. Military issue. I froze. "This isn't mine." "It is now," he said. "But before you open it, you need to know something. Something no one else alive knows." I opened the box anyway. Inside were 3 things. A blood-stained wedding ring, a folded American flag, and a birth certificate with my name and 2 fathers' names. Yes, you heard that right. 2. One struck through in black ink. Robert Briggs. The other, freshly typed beneath. Edward Leighton. I couldn't breathe. My lungs shrank under the weight of it all. "You forged my papers?" I whispered. He looked up slowly. "No." I reversed the lie. Then came the story I was never supposed to hear. During Desert Storm, my mother, then a young medic, was stationed in Kuwait. She treated a wounded colonel named Edward Leighton. They fell in love, real love. But he was from the wrong background. No connections. No stars on his shoulders. My father, Robert, was already a rising star. He wanted a perfect image. A military wife. A legacy. A child that would carry his blood, and only his blood. When she returned pregnant, he offered her a choice. Him or exile. She chose survival. "But she always loved Edward," he whispered. "Even after she married me. Even in the house we built. I saw it in her eyes every day." I stood up, my heart pounding like a warning bell. "You hated me because I wasn't yours." He didn't flinch. No, Eleanor. I hated you because you were his. And you reminded her of everything I could never be. There it was. The real truth. The secret no metal could hide. My entire childhood, every slap disguised as discipline, every insult masked as tough love, had nothing to do with who I was. It was about who he wasn't. I stepped closer. You stole a man's child. You caged a woman's heart. And you buried me beneath a name that never fit. He looked up, defeated. And yet you still became everything I couldn't. I should have left. Should have stormed out and let the weight of his shame crush him alone. But a part of me, some twisted fragment of the little girl still craving approval, paused. And that's when he said something that chilled my bones. He's alive. I turned slowly. What? Edward. Your real father. He's alive. And he asked about you 3 weeks ago. I staggered. Where? He shook his head. I promised your mother I'd never tell. Not until you reached this rank. She said you'd know the truth when you were strong enough to survive it. It felt like my lungs collapsed. I'd spent a lifetime fighting for a name that wasn't mine, saluting a man who never deserved my respect. And now, the man I'd only met in letters was still out there? I wanted to scream, to burn everything down, but I didn't. Instead, I said, give me his name, his address, or the next time we meet, it'll be across a courtroom, not a conference room. He reached into his pocket and slid me a note. Just one word, one name, Leighton, Virginia. He never stopped loving her, my father whispered. Even after all these years, he built a house by the lake. Left the porch light on every night, just in case she ever found her way back. I was shaking. Why are you telling me this now? He finally looked at me, not as a soldier, not as a disappointment, but as a daughter, because I finally realized you never needed my name to become who you are. That night, I drove 6 hours straight. No radio, no music, just my mother's voice in my head, telling me I was stronger than he ever knew. As I pulled up to the cabin in Leighton, a single porch light blinked in the dark. I stepped out of the car, and just before I knocked, the door opened. He stood there, older, thinner than the man in the photo my mother had kept hidden beneath her grave, but his eyes were mine. Not my father's. Not Robert Briggs's cold, calculating stare. No, these eyes held storms. Still, quiet. Dangerous in their depth, but warm. Eleanor, he asked, like he wasn't sure I was real. I could barely speak. Colonel Edward Leighton? He nodded once. Call me Edward. Or, if you want, you can call me Dad. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My breath caught in my chest like a fist. For a moment, I saw flashes of every battle I had ever fought, every push-up in the rain, every backhanded compliment, every whispered insult in the halls of command. And suddenly, all I wanted was the truth. Why did you disappear? I asked as I stepped into the warm light of his home. It smelled like cedarwood and coffee. No photos of war. No medals. Just a fireplace crackling and the sound of silence that felt earned. He motioned to the armchair across from his. Because if I hadn't, your mother would have been destroyed. The story he told next unraveled the last thread of my childhood illusion. He and my mother, Serena, had fallen deeply in love during their time stationed abroad. Their bond wasn't just romantic, it was spiritual. She had been suffocating under Robert's growing ego. When she met Edward, she told him everything. She said Robert married her for the image, Edward explained, and that she felt like a ribbon pinned to his chest. Pretty, but replaceable. She wanted out. She wanted Edward. But Robert Briggs was a rising star. Divorce would have ended his career. And my mother knew it. So she made a deal with the devil. She gave up Edward. And she gave birth to me under Robert's name. I offered to fight for you, Edward said, his voice cracking. She begged me not to. She said Robert would ruin both our lives. So I left the army. Disappeared. I kept writing, but his voice broke. She never wrote back. I swallowed hard. Because he threatened her. Edward nodded. She was strong, but he was louder. And in the military, noise wins over truth. We sat in silence for a long while. I studied him, the scars on his hands, the way he leaned when he stood, like a man who had carried too much for too long. He broke the silence. You remind me of her, not just in the face, but in fire. I smiled faintly. Then the question spilled from my lips like a wound. Why did you leave the porch light on? He turned to me, eyes glassy. Because I made her a promise. That no matter how long it took, if she or you ever came looking, I'd be here. That night, he cooked stew. Real stew. Not the freeze-dried garbage I lived on during deployments. And while we ate, he asked about my life. I told him about West Point, about Robert's silence after every award I won. How I nearly quit my first year just to feel like I had a choice. I told him about the letters. The photo. The third letter I found taped beneath her grave. And then I told him the truth. She died crying. I'll never forget that night. The night she collapsed in our kitchen, clutching the ring she had hidden in her apron pocket, Edward's ring. Not Robert's. He had sent it to her from a P.O. box. I found it in her drawer days later. Edward said nothing at first. He just stared into the fire. Then finally, she waited too long. And that's when he handed me the tape. An old, labeled cassette. For Eleanor. In case I'm gone before the truth finds her. I didn't even realize I was crying until I slid it into the old stereo and heard her voice. Baby girl, if you're hearing this, I'm gone. But not gone. I'm with you. Always. I left you in silence because I thought it would protect you. But the truth is, silence is a poison. And you deserve better. My knees buckled. Edward caught me. I loved you more than the world itself. And your real father, Edward, he never stopped loving either of us. But I made the choice to keep him away. Forgive me, sweetheart. Please forgive me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire while Edward slept in the other room. I listened to her voice over and over, memorizing every breath, every pause. Because for the first time I understood something. My whole life, I'd been taught to endure, to obey, to survive. But I'd never been taught to feel. And now I was feeling everything. At once. The next morning, Edward handed me a sealed envelope. Her last letter, he said. She wrote it a week before she died. She never mailed it. But I think you're ready. I opened it. Inside, just 6 words. Light the fire that heals us. I wept. Because I knew what I had to do next. I sat in my car, parked just outside the Briggs family estate in Arlington, cold stone, black steel gates, and manicured silence. A house built on order. A fortress designed to keep feelings out and secrets in. Inside that house was the man who raised me. Not out of love, but out of control. He still lived there alone now. No wife. No warmth. Just shadows and his regrets. Clutched in my hand was my mother's final letter. 6 words that burned hotter the longer I held them. Light the fire that heals us. That morning, before leaving Edward's cabin, I asked him what he thought she meant. His answer was simple. Tell the truth. All of it. Out loud. Even if it burns. So that's what I came to do. Not just for me. Not even just for her. But for every woman who's ever been silenced by the image of a powerful man. For every soldier who wore a legacy that didn't belong to them. When I entered the house, I didn't knock. Robert, I said as I stepped into the grand hallway. My voice echoed against glass-framed certificates and portraits of a man who'd built his reputation one lie at a time. He was in the den. Whiskey in one hand, old photo in the other. You came back, he said without looking up. You always come back. I stood tall. No salute. No warmth. I came to light the fire. He finally looked up. A smirk tugged at the edge of his lips. Still chasing metaphors like your mother. I didn't blink. I held out the letter. She wrote this. Her final words. And she meant for it to undo everything you buried. He stared at the paper. Didn't touch it. That woman was always dramatic. No, I snapped. She was silenced. You made her quiet, and I let you do the same to me for decades. His eyes narrowed. Everything I did to protect our name. I stepped closer. But it was never your name, was it? It was built on someone else's child. Someone else's love. His jaw clenched. And yet, that name got you into West Point. Into command. Into power. I took a deep breath. No. I got me there. Despite you. He slammed the glass down, the whiskey splashing onto the mahogany. You want the truth? Fine. I knew from the moment she came back from Kuwait pregnant that you weren't mine. I offered her a deal. Me or disgrace. She chose survival. And you were the price. I felt my chest tighten. So, you punish me for her choice? He looked away. I made you strong. No, I said, voice low, shaking. You made me numb. You made me question my worth for 55 years. You made me carry medals like armor just to feel seen. He stood then, eyes locked on mine. For the first time, I saw the truth behind his silence. Fear. Not of me, but of what the world would think if they knew. Do you know what it would have done to my career? If they knew I raised another man's child. I shook my head. No, Robert. The question is, do you know what it did to me? Then I pulled out the recorder. Pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room. I always wanted to tell you. But silence became a second skin. And Robert, he wore control like a badge. But you were always fire, Eleanor. You burned even when they buried you in frost. You are a legacy. Not his. Not mine. Ours. Yours and Edward's. Robert turned pale. He tried to stand again, but stumbled. His hand gripped the back of the chair like he was about to fall. I didn't rush to help him. Not this time. You wanted to shape me in your image, I said, but I am the wildfire your house of lies couldn't contain. He sank into the chair, defeated. I walked to the fireplace, took the stack of awards he had displayed for himself, the ones he never let me touch growing up, and I tossed them in, one by one, until the flames swallowed the legacy he built on silence. He didn't stop me, because deep down he knew this was never about revenge. It was about reclamation, of my truth, of my story, of my name. I left the house with the smell of smoke on my clothes. Outside, the rain had started to fall. Gentle, cleansing. I sat in my car for a long time, watching the flames flicker behind the frosted glass windows. And then I dialed the number Edward had scribbled on the back of the envelope. Dad, I said when he picked up. I lit the fire, just like she asked. That weekend, I did something no one expected. I held a press conference at Arlington Hall. In full uniform. Behind me, Edward Leighton, the man I now called father. Beside me, a framed photo of my mother. No medals, just her smile. I told the world everything. The lies, the legacy, the woman who sacrificed her voice so I could find mine. And then I handed Edward a folded flag, the one from the box Robert had tried to keep buried. She wanted you to have this, I said. He took it with trembling hands and whispered, she's finally home. That night, as I watched the porch light flicker at Edward's cabin, I finally understood the truth behind my mother's words. Light the fire that heals us. It was never about destruction. It was about illumination, letting the world see what had been hidden, letting love rise from ash, letting me be free. There are moments in life that slice you clean open, quiet moments, not loud ones. Not explosions, not slaps, but the kind that sneak in like fog and never leave. For me, that moment came 2 weeks after the press conference. I was alone at Arlington National Cemetery, standing at my mother's grave. No cameras, no uniforms, just me, the wind, and the unspoken weight of a life that was never fully hers to live. I knelt down and whispered. I told them, everything, just like you wanted. The wind rustled through the trees like a sigh. They believed me, Mom. I ran my hand across the fresh flowers I'd placed that morning. Some called me brave. Some called me foolish. But for once, I didn't care what they called me. Because I had finally called myself something too. Mine. The military board had summoned me for a private debrief. Not as punishment, but as curiosity. Why now? Why expose it? Why burn down the myth of Robert Briggs when you stood to benefit from the legend? My answer was simple. Because silence is the disease. And I was raised inside its belly. But what they didn't expect, what no one expected, was the aftermath. Young female cadets began writing to me. Retired officers' widows emailed confessions. One letter read, I, too, had a daughter by a man the army erased. It hit me like a tidal wave. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. Still, there was one thing left. A decision that would make or unmake everything I'd become. Changing my name. Officially. Legally. Emotionally. Robert Briggs was no longer my father. Not in truth. Not in love. Not in legacy. But the name? It was everywhere. On my birth certificate. On every promotion. On every award and plaque. To strip it would mean surrendering all of it. To keep it would mean carrying the same chain that had bruised my mother's soul and silenced mine for decades. So I went to the lake cabin. Edward stood at the porch, sipping coffee. The sun lit the wrinkles in his face like war paint. You've been quiet, he said as I joined him. I handed him the court papers. I'm changing it. His eyebrows rose. To what? I smiled. Eleanor Leighton. He blinked once, then twice. Are you sure? I've never been more sure. He set the mug down. Took my hands. Then allow me, he said, his voice cracking, to welcome you into the name your mother whispered every night after you fell asleep. Tears slipped from my eyes before I even knew they were coming. A week later, I stood at the VA Women's Memorial. A new plaque was unveiled. It didn't say daughter of General Robert Briggs. It read, Captain Eleanor Leighton, daughter of truth, born in silence, raised in fire, rebuilt in love. I gave a speech that day, not for the press, not for the army, but for every woman who'd ever swallowed her voice in the name of survival. My mother taught me to be quiet. My father taught me to be hard, but I taught myself to be free. There wasn't a dry eye in the front row, especially not Edward's. But the world doesn't stop for closure. Not long after, I was offered a new position, Director of Truth and Ethics in Military Affairs. A role created because of my story. Because sometimes when you burn down a house, you don't leave behind ash. You leave behind room. And then came a letter. From him, Robert. Still alive. Still alone. Still behind glass walls. His handwriting was shaky. Eleanor, you were never a mistake. You were a mirror. And I hated what I saw. I lost the only woman I ever loved. And then I lost the only daughter I never deserved. Thank you for lighting the fire. It showed me what I burned down. I hope one day you can forgive me. RB. I folded the letter, slid it into a drawer, and whispered to the air. I forgive you, but I'll never return. Closure doesn't always look like hugs. Sometimes it looks like walking away and never turning back. Now, as I sit by the lake with Edward, my father in name, spirit, and truth, I realize something. The fire didn't just heal me. It set generations free. My mother, Edward, me, and the young woman out there, listening to this, wondering if her truth is too messy to matter. It isn't. Your voice is not a weapon. It's a torch. Light it. Let the world see.